Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the AFS Cinema. I'm Lars Nilsson, the guy you're not going to be hearing much from tonight. And I want to say, first of all, before I bring out our special host and programmer for the evening, this is going to be an ISHTAR opprobrium-free zone. This is the ISHTAR rehabilitation of reputation is on, and it's all happening here. So jeering, if you must jeer, jeer down into your shirt quietly. We'll have no jeering at ISHTAR tonight. Yeah, ISHTAR is a wonderful movie, and we like it a lot, and so nobody laugh, all right? Just kidding, laugh. But understand that Elaine May, one of the great masters of comedy of all time, created this movie, and it's supposed to be funny in the ways that it's funny. So, but I'm going to bring up to the stage right now a man who's very funny, a man who's going to make you laugh until you cry with his introduction. AFS founder and artistic director, Richard Linklater.
Lars already sets me up with something I can't deliver on, so I have no intention of being funny. Well, thank you for being here tonight. ISHTAR, I've been looking forward to this for, I'll honestly say, about 30 years, you know? I saw ISHTAR when it came out, and, you know, a lot of this series, I just kind of give you my subjective history with this film. And if you're young enough to not know what we're talking about, back in the 80s, this was a notorious film for all the kind of wrong reasons, but it fits into my theme of this whole series, that the 80s was really tough on artists. It was tough. There had been this huge backlash in Hollywood and the culture in general. And I can't think of any film that took a bullet more than ISHTAR. Heaven's Gate kind of kicked off the decade. That was a bad start for like the suits in studios who just kind of declaring war on the artist. But it reached another peak here. So as a film fan and a big fan of everyone involved in this movie, the word on it, as it kind of, well, it was always negative. It was supposed to come out in Christmas of '86, and it got pushed. So that means the film must suck. You know, it's got problems. So it came out the next year, but it was all bad. It was how much it went over budget, how bad it is, and it was just. And come to find out, this whole war on ISHTAR was really started by its own studio, the people who owned the movie. It had been taken over by David Putnam, a new British producer, Chariots of Fire, and you know, he made some good films. Local hero, I'll give him that. But so this British producer is now made head of a studio in LA. He comes in, and I remember reading an interview with this guy when he came in. He says, directors are going to have to, you know, his new agenda for the studio and Hollywood was, you know, directors are going to have to take a couple steps back. You know, he says, if you've made Fanny and Alexander, I want to see it. If you haven't done that, you know, let's talk. You know, if you've done Fanny and Alexander, I might listen to you, but anything less than that. So he's basically saying you guys are all on notice. And in the crosshairs here, he takes over the studio and he inherits this film that's already happening. It's already, you know, I don't know what stage was it?
It hadn't started yet.
It hadn't started yet, but it was already a go. Who's going to say no to Warren Beatty? You know, this film came about because of Beatty's relationship with Elaine May. She had helped him write, obviously, Heaven Can Wait, and she did some work on Reds. And he felt, this is her fourth film, he felt she hadn't really been produced very well. She'd made 3 really great films, if you haven't seen them, New Leaf, Mikey and Nikki, Heartbreak Kid. But this is her 4th film. It's like, why isn't Elaine May making more movies? She should be. Those films hadn't done, I guess Heartbreak Kid had been kind of a hit, you know, Neil Simon played, but her other 2 just hadn't been that successful. And Beatty, who had the reputation as the best producer, you know, in Hollywood, among other things, you know, he was, like, let's make a film. What are you doing? And she had written this film, kind of her send-up of the Hope and Crosby films of the 40s and 50s, Road to Bali, Road to Zanzibar, Road to Utopia, Road to, all those movies, to Dimwits, In Trouble, On the Road. So this was her concept, and Beatty, Hoffman, kind of both playing against type, you'll see. Well, first off, how many of you have never seen Ishtar? Everybody, good, we're all, yeah. So they're very much playing against type. That's a good tongue-in-cheek beginning right there. And it's kind of a formula in a way. She wanted to call it Road to Ishtar, but I think I forget the reason, but they just went with Ishtar. So I, at the time, to get back to, okay, so much negative word, I go to the movie, not very full theater, and I'm laughing. At this point I'm in my mid-20s, I go, it's funny. I know I'm supposed to hate this, but it's really funny. The songs, there are these two loser songwriters, singer-songwriters, and it's really hard to do. I think it's easier, like if you think of bad, funny, good, bad. Like Spinal Tap does it, obviously, but I think that's a slightly lower bar. It's easier to send up heavy metal than it is, these guys are Rogers and Clark, I think, instead of Rogers and Hart. That's harder to send up. That's the greatest songwriters ever. So they're in a different sophisticated area, and these guys want to be like Simon and Garfunkel or something. But Paul Williams and Elaine May wrote a lot of the songs, but as did Hoffman and Beatty. The music is wonderful, and that's pretty much the beginning of the movie. That's what kicks it off. These guys are so bad, they're doing so poorly, they get a new agent, and he books them a gig in Morocco. Like, who wouldn't want a job, in North Africa or whatever. So they end up over there, and here comes the political intrigue and the, all that ensues. And it's funny. It's a satire of U.S. politics or geopolitical, the Reagan era politics of the day. And the music, Paul Williams, and I just remember being really, really funny and adult and sophisticated. It's not, I think the biggest comedy of this year was like Crocodile Dundee. So you saw where the 80s were going. It was only getting worse. And here comes this film, pitched at an adult level. I saw in the New York Times today, there's an article on the trailblazing women of comedy, brainy, brazen, and I scrolled down like, where's Elaine May? Boom, there she is. Brazen, brainy, funny, witty, satirical, acerbic. It's all in this movie. And, Putnam, they just didn't like these three people in particular. They're all, the three of them, Hoffman, Beatty, and May, had reps as perfectionists, as, kind of obsessives who do a million takes, who, in her previous film, she had a rep for shooting a ton of footage. She just, and spending that extra year editing, No one ever called her a female Eric von Stroheim or anything, but she has that right. Elaine May, in my opinion, can do whatever the hell she needs to do to achieve her artistic goals. I think she had earned that. And they sort of crucified her in all of them, but I think she took the bullet, she hasn't made another film, So, but the evil thing of, and this what was so sucky about the 80s and to this day, but this was born, I believe, from my perspective, in the 80s, where suddenly everything was about business. Oh, they're over budget. Our Hollywood, the films cost the same at the box office, right? Who cares what their budget was? Do you really? Does it affect your life that some studio in Hollywood, some multinational conglomerate is a little over budget on one of their products? I don't care. But boy, the journalists it's like there was this bonfire and they all heaped on. And that trickles down. It trickles down to the public. It's like, ooh, they're over budget. Ooh, it cost some dough. Beatty and Hoffman got paid $5 million. Ooh, and it was just like, so the person on the street was like, oh, that Ishtar is terrible. You're like, have you seen it? No, I'm not gonna see it. You know, so that was just, and to this day, that's why I really look forward to seeing this again, because for 30 years I've been defending this movie. Mainly just going, have you seen it? First is, have you seen it? And the answer is always no, but they just know it's terrible. And then it's just like, it's funny, it's adult, it's kind of the best of what Hollywood should be trying to do. But this was sort of the end of that in a certain way. It was sort of, the war was on, and so the 80s were just, it was a struggle. But, you know, Elaine May, we're here for her tonight. You know, she's one of the all-time greats. If you're not that familiar with her work, you know, you can YouTube her and Mike Nichols' performance. There's a lot online. Again, very sophisticated, very just funny, you know. She had that short career with Mike Nichols, but it was still historic. People talk about it all these years later, late 50s, early 60s. They were only a comedy team, a couple, you know, there were albums, they were on a Broadway show. They had met in you know, Chicago. They'd both gone to school there, and just had that, they could improv, just funny. It just changed comedy, and it was brief. She started writing plays. He obviously became Mike Nichols, you know, great director, and they worked together again too. They did, she worked with him on Birdcage and Primary Colors. She wrote that with him. So she's had this long career. She shows up as an actor every now and then. One of the last times I think I saw her was Small Time Crooks, the Woody Allen film. But she's brilliant. Her performance in, you know, New Leaf is wonderful. So sending it out to Elaine May tonight. We're here for your movie. We don't prejudge you because you went over budget or shot too much film. Who gives a shit? 30 years later especially. Let's just watch the movie and enjoy it. And Lars and I will be up after to talk about it. We'll hear your, whatever you got to say. Laugh as much as you feel compelled to. It's just fun to see these guys. And great cast too. Isabelle Adjani, Charles Grodin. A lot of people show up in this movie. You know, it's solid. It definitely got so much worse than it deserved for so many of the wrong reasons, corporate Hollywood, that we haven't escaped to this day. But all right, enjoy the film. We'll be up here after. Thanks.
So you hadn't seen it. I've watched that,
Yeah, was that
7 or 8 times over the years, but
you have? No,
you hadn't seen it in years.
no. Seriously, 30 years. 30 years. Remember how much of it? Yeah, I remembered quite a bit. I mean, it was everything I thought. What you guys think? Everybody like it?
Yeah.
It's funny. It's funny. You know, they have that award every year for best animal performance. I'm pretty sure that camel didn't win because it didn't win any awards, but that camel got robbed that year. That was clearly the best animal performance in a movie.
The only award that this won, and I'm kind of seething with inner rage, the only award this won was the Razzies for Worst Director for Elaine May. Which is like, I'm really angry. Yeah, fuck you. To the people who run the Razzies, fuck you. Put that on camera.
You're often right, but you weren't that year.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's terrible. But you see, it was just this hatred. You think, I mean, hate to get all sexist, but it was a female making a big movie. Would that offend everybody so much? Big movie, you know, it's a big comedy, but I don't know. I think everybody was just offended. It was, you know.
I think it's part of, I mean, it was so ahead of its time. Like all the sort of, like the current humor, like post-Tim and Eric and all of that, and the way that we sort of understand humor, it's like we're there now. Audiences can get this movie now, but it really was kind of ahead of its time, and
it was so unconventional at the time. I think people didn't, what it was riffing on was, that was so far in the past, the 80s, I don't know. In the pitch was definitely not for people in their 20s, which by that time the audience was complete. You know, this was so far from what was popular at that time. But, you know, that's when you count on critics and people to be with it, and kind of what the Pauline Kaels of the world would say, hey, no, you know, this is actually good. But I don't remember any critics at the time
Siskel and Ebert just savaged it.
Throwing down for it. I don't think anyone supported it.
Kael was kind of up and down on it. She was like, the ultimate effect that you have is that you're just kind of dazed.
But I mean, she saw some good in it. And then, but then, like your average sort of newspaper critics were just kind of like, you know, the sort of Consumer Report type critics,
Oh,
like,
they
don't waste your money. They were kind of like that.
Well, it's so rare that, I mean, those guys get hyped by the studios. Whoever's releasing the movie, oh, this is the best film of the year. Yeah. You know, they hear so much hype. To hear finally from someone saying, hey, you know, we're releasing this film, but it's actually not very good. They don't ever hear that. So they enjoyed that. They took that cue and just kind of shot down the turkey, you know, that had been lofted up in front of them. But it's not that. It's really, you know, to think that it was a part of a studio's agenda to make the last regime look bad, to usher in this new regime that would be the anti-ISHTAR. Not letting artists like these, you know, make their own comedy to their own sensibilities, to their own, you know, unconventional, but actually such unique standards of what's funny. This movie has so many great lines, I almost forget.
I used to hunt every day until they opened the tire factory.
Yeah, there's just so many, just constant, you know, it's really.
It's a work of brilliance by a brilliant artist. I mean, I really, like, some people might think that's going overboard, but it really
And
is.
all of them, they're all, Charles Grodin is so good in this movie. I mean, it's just an unbelievable performance. He's always great, and he's worked so well with them. You know,
If you haven't seen Heartbreak Kid, just go out and watch it.
Yeah, that's
as soon
his
as you can.
big. They had worked together in that, but I mean, he's so good in just everything. And Heaven Can Wait. You know, I was thinking, you know, this is sort of since it's kind of a throwback to the, you know, Bing Crosby, Bob Hope, that they had worked together successful in Heaven Can Wait. You know, that was sort of a throwback, a remake of Here Comes Mr. Jordan, also from that era. So I think they had that sensibility, just like, hey, let's make a little old-fashioned, but with a totally modern, with all of our modern politics and wit and humor. So it was a formula that worked so well in Heaven Can Wait.
Which was a big hit.
Huge hit.
Yeah.
So yeah, one of the biggest of the year. And that's a smart, funny movie, you know, very, again, adult, but appeal to, you know, all audiences. And I think they probably felt they were on okay ground, because this is, you know, if not the same, you know, in that area. And Beatty and Hoffman are at the top of their game here. They haven't failed, really. I mean, Tootsie is not that far in Hoffman's rearview mirror. Kramer versus Kramer, you know, that era. And obviously Beatty is, you know, Reds wasn't that long ago, and he's just, they were all pretty iconic at that time. But I think it's so brave, and maybe Warren Beatty might have just, it might have irritated people to see him playing such a doofus, because they know he's so, you know, obviously one of the smarter guys.
And shy around girls also.
Yeah, all that, to see him, but I think that's hilarious, you know, that Hoffman's playing the ladies' man. What's he saying when he's walking? He says, oh yeah, only a short guy, like a tall guy can't do that. he's bumbling around. That's really hilarious. I mean, I love the pitch. It's up there and it's consistent. So it's a hard thing to pull off. It's a rarefied, in the world of comedy, that's a rarefied skill sets operating in this movie, from the performances, the writing, you know, everything about it.
And it's just perverse, and just the setups of the comic situations are so sick and perverse, and the helicopters swooping in, and the vultures. It's just amazing scenes.
Yeah, it needs that scope. I don't mind them spending what they have to, you know, to be in the Middle East, to get those extras, to really sell all that. You know, there's be a worse movie. You don't do a cheap version of this. Again, I don't.
And I think that sick humor, like part of what goes into sick humor is having those giant stars, like those giant stars and great actors playing in such sort of a semi-trivial, what would seem to be a trivial situation.
Yeah, but it really takes guts to get out there and sing and make a fool of yourself. You know, that's really brave for them. You know how vulnerable, like someone who, those guys aren't professional singers and they're playing bad, but it's still got to be tough to get out there and do that.
To be that bad.
Yeah. But to be, I heard actually that perfectionist that she is, that they really learned, even though they were only going to use bits of all the songs, you know, you don't really get a complete song, that they actually learned and did full songs for every song. Does anyone have the soundtrack? Do you have the soundtrack?
No.
I know what to get you for Christmas.
Yeah.
Is it available? The studio's so dumped this. I wouldn't be surprised
Oh,
if,
no.
if
The
it wasn't
ISHTAR
even
soundtrack?
available.
Oh, get out of here. No way.
They didn't even release it on, like, this was, I don't think they released it on video for a long time.
They didn't? Yeah, they didn't.
Yeah,
never
it
came out on
wasn't
DVD.
available.
DVD never came out. Like, it came out on VHS, and then, like, it was 2013, it came out on Blu-ray.
It's almost like they didn't want anyone to ever, like they had spoken, it sucked.
Yeah.
It was a failure.
Yeah,
They didn't
absolutely.
kind of want anyone to ever, see it and reevaluate that.
Yeah, like, it's like you're calling their bluff. But the thing is that Sony's now, like, they've re-released it, they did a whole big thing. They released it to film festivals, and it's kind of had its
Yeah.
reevaluation.
However many regimes later, they don't really, they're pretty bad at having institutional memories,
Yeah.
studios. They can, like, the new regime is a complete etch-a-sketch, wipe. And, they can, that's kind of a good thing, I think, about Hollywood.
If anybody wants to hear more
Short
stories
memories.
about Hollywood not having no memory and no care for their catalog, buy me 6 drinks, and I'll tell you lots of cool stories.
Yeah, I'm trying to find their films and stuff.
I wonder if anybody has any questions
Yeah,
or
or
contributions.
comments,
here.
we're just up here jabbering.
I had a question. I had heard, I don't know whether it's true or not, that Coca-Cola, for whatever reason, backed out on it and spent millions trying to kill it. Ergo, the comment in there, coffee, tea, Pepsi-Cola. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, Coca-Cola had bought,
They own the studio, right?
yeah, they own the studio, and they looked at this and they said, wait a minute, we could lose this much money, and they divested.
They
They divested immediately in the wake of this being a failure.
of the studio.
They divested of, what was it, Columbia Pictures Entertainment.
Yeah, it was part of their
Yeah.
corporate thing.
Yeah.
And, I think the punchline was when they went, that Putnam was very short-lived. The guy
Yeah,
who
yeah,
was
yeah.
kind of against the film from his regime change. He ended up having, instead of far from revolutionizing Hollywood, he had one of the shorter reigns of a studio head.
Yeah, he was out like by 88 or something.
Yeah,
he was
I
done.
think it was less than a year.
Yeah, yeah,
But he rubbed a lot of people the wrong way
yeah.
in that year.
Anybody else? Yeah, right over here.
I was just gonna add, like, mention like David Putnam, and he had his, the way I read it is like his ISHTAR was The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. And the people that came in after him basically did the same thing that he did to this. Like they kind of like pumped it. And, it's like, oh,
He greenlit Munchausen?
I think so.
By proxy.
Was that year? No, wasn't that?
It was like 88, 89 when it came out.
Okay, yeah,
And then the other people.
quite possible.
That was a funny joke.
Yeah.
Good. Keep it rolling. Right over here.
Well, I was just gonna say, I haven't laughed that hard in such a long time, that it was so refreshing, honestly.
Yeah, it's really funny, and I think it's like watching it with an audience where the awkwardness and the laugh just kind of ripple. It's like, wait a minute, other people think this camel's funny?
Yeah.
It's just how comedies should work, and it didn't really have that upon our initial release, because you went.
Yeah,
and
the
it was
awkward line, I think there was such toxicity in the
Yeah,
air
yeah.
about it that, I remember even in the theater kind of going, that's really fun, and then like looking around, anyone else think this is funny?
Yeah.
Am I supposed to laugh? It was like, ooh, but no, it was you had to appreciate it. But you're right, studios have a long history of that, every filmmaker goes through that. The regime that greenlit your film is no longer there, and it doesn't do them any good if your film does well. It even makes the last person that they're demonizing look good, so it's very common. Every filmmaker in Hollywood has a story.
Happened twice with Lane May, because it's A New Leaf, same thing happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing, they dumped it and recut that. So, yeah, she hasn't had the best.
Yeah,
But-
she really got a raw deal.
It is ridiculous that but I'm not so sure, did she have other projects she was really trying to get made and didn't, or did she just go back to New York and do writing and theater?
Well,
Was
what do you
it-
think? I mean, it's a moot point, really. Like if
Yeah.
she had other things she was working on, because at this point you're just so sunk. Like after ISHTAR is like every late night comedian's punchline for a bomb movie. It becomes synonymous with bombs.
Yeah.
There's no way that she could have gotten anything else going, which is it's total tragedy. And you look at Mike Nichols' career; he was a working director for a long time.
Well, they are. I mean, okay, if you want to blame ISHTAR, Beatty's back a couple years later doing an equally big budget Dick Tracy.
Mm-hmm.
Hoffman never didn't lose a step, you know, he's career, so he didn't, I mean, she took the bullet, which
Yeah.
is, you know. She's writer-director, but at the same time, you know,
There's part of me that does wonder if it's a bit of sexism because Michael Cimino worked actually for the same studio for UA, did 3 movies after Heaven's Gate.
sure.
And pretty much within like a 5 or 6 year period.
Yeah, he's back with, well, there's a nice, what,
I guess 3 year or 4 year.
multi-year gap there
Yeah.
before his next film, but still, a next film nonetheless. So,
Anybody else got any comments or questions? Yeah, right over here.
I was gonna say that I remember this kind of being mentioned with Heaven's Gate as being just like the bomb of the century, and then in college they started showing it on HBO, and my roommate
Heaven's
and I,
Gate?
what's that?
Heaven's Gate or this?
No, ISHTAR.
Yeah, okay.
So we would watch it. We watched it probably 20 times over the year that HBO was playing it, and then for the next 30 years I'd walk around and be like people talking about favorite movies, and I'd be like, oh, you seen ISHTAR? And I think 5 people said yes, and you couldn't rent it, you couldn't stream it, you couldn't find it, and so thank you for bringing it back.
Well, yeah, it's good to be, we're part of a wave of, its revival, so.
Elaine May said an interesting thing. She said, if all the people who hated my movie went and saw it, I would have made a lot of money on it. It really was a movie not many people saw it. And then Dustin Hoffman in an interview said an interesting thing. He said that he went to Jimmy Breslin. He's like, I can't figure out why everybody's so down on this movie. And Breslin, who was like the influential columnist of the New York Daily News or Newsday, said that when the hit's out on the movie, the hit's out. You can't do anything about it. So it's just like the hit was out on it.
Yeah, you just gotta, it's like sometimes your number's up, I think that's just how movies go, sometimes they're just, everyone decides that your movie sucks before they even see it, or it's just something conceptually. I think seeing Beatty and Hoffman with those headbands and stuff, people had advanced pictures of them and just went, no. This doesn't look like, no, they're not doing it, and then all the budgetary things, of course, but it was a double whammy.
Elaine May claimed it was only a $30 million budget, which is like the equivalent of a $65 million budget today. But some of the numbers floating around were like $50 to $70 million budget. And so if people are walking into a comedy going, oh yeah, this is a really expensive comedy, then it kind of torpedoes some aspect of the goodwill towards it.
I think, like even Spielberg with 1941, I think that budget escalated, and he was the poster, that was his ISHTAR, but, he had George Lucas to rescue him a year later, to bring him into Indiana Jones. But, yeah, I think he said at some point he realized, oh, this has to be the most successful comedy in history to get its money back. Oops. So, like, yeah, you just wind up in that position.
Tough world for comedy. Right over here.
I wonder what Beatty and Hoffman's thoughts would be on it today. Have you heard any more recent comments?
Yeah, because it's often the people involved in it, they kind of buy in too, and you don't want to look defensive and be like, hey, that's actually a good movie. They just get tired. Maybe you go along with the joke with the late night hosts. So, but I'm not really sure. I haven't really heard anything from either of them about it.
They both have stuck by it.
They did?
They both buy it. I haven't heard anything from Beatty about it recently, but Hoffman was asked recently, like when it was revived, and he said, yeah, it was ahead of its time.
Yeah,
that was really good.
That's good. Yeah.
Anybody else got any? Right over here, yeah.
I feel like you're kind of joined a cult tonight. Like, how do we convince your parents to give this a second chance?
Well, why do you
They
need
give
to
it
do
a
that?
first chance? Did they give it a first chance?
I've seen this movie before, and it was with them, and it was a very toxic environment, so I did not enjoy it the first time. And this was a different experience. How do we convince them to sit down and give it a second chance?
Like, what if you don't? I mean, at some point in your life, Justin, you're gonna have to forgive your parents for all the things.
That toxic environment. What can you do?
It's really okay if there's different generations.
Thinking in film history, because there's a lot of films that just underperformed. Wizard of Oz, It's a Beautiful Life. You know, there's a ton of classics that you would think, oh, that was a huge hit. It's like, no, it didn't really light up the box office, but now it's seen as a big thing. But they weren't hated on their release. They weren't, you know, it's pretty unprecedented. I'm just thinking of Heaven's Gate and this.
But I can tell you a few that were hated on the
In
release that now,
advance.
like Apocalypse Now.
Oh, that's true.
Like people, younger people.
Yeah, they had
Apocalypse
it
Now,
with Francis
Yeah,
on that.
like when that came out, it was
His
just
multiple
like, oh, here comes the bomb.
Oscars and yeah, that same thing
Yeah.
a year over, you know, he lost his mind out, and yet it made $100 million.
Mhm.
You know, and it didn't win Cannes and stuff. I mean,
But it was still even critically savage. Even it came out for a lot of time. The Shining was the same thing, which we now think of as a classic. That was not critically popular. These are all things that have
Yeah.
appreciated over the years. And Ishtar, I mean, you know, it's not going to have the same kind of impact or, you know,
yeah, because it's not like as serious a movie
Yeah.
as, you know, but The Shining, sure, I remember
Mhm.
that summer actually when it was out. It's like everyone's like, what's he doing? You know, this film did not fit in the Kubrick canon at all, even though it was a big hit. It was like, oh yeah, it's just not a good film, but there's some good moments in it, you know, whatever.
Art is long, life is short. So like
Yeah.
the sort of appreciation. Moby Dick came out, everybody hated it. People were like, "What's up with this book?" They actually threw the book away. But it's true. Like Shakespeare, there was considered a bum. They called him a bum.
It was a bum.
Anybody
Never
else
gonna
got?
make it.
Anybody else? I like where we're going with this, by the way. Right over here.
I think a big part of it is actually how people responded to it after. Like, I remember being a kid and watching TV shows where Dustin Hoffman would make a joke, being like, "Oh, I'm sorry about Ishtar," or like.
That's what I mean. I think I remember him.
Yeah.
You kind of have to say, you go along with the consensus a little bit.
It becomes an easy gag. Yeah.
Yeah. But you know, something you work so hard on, and you know, for your collaborators, you know, I think you just have to be quiet. You know, but you know, it feels weird to be defensive.
I think there is a cult, and I think that's good. I mean, I think it, to like
Yeah.
appreciate it on this level is great. Right over here.
I think people didn't go into the movie understanding like the irony of it.
Mhm.
They're like, oh, they're not even that good as singers. Like, I don't get it.
You know what? That's also, I don't know if it's just general stupidity, or I keep blaming it on the 80s, but 80s became the humor level. I don't know. It's just like there was less room for this kind of humor. Again, it became less sophisticated, there was like wit and intelligence was forced underground. The mainstream was just so obvious, so conventional and conformist that this is so antithetical to what the air everybody was breathing at the time. So it was just a crummy decade for them.
But people would look to like Pee Wee Herman for like subversive humor. They would look for like that sort of undercurrent of interesting stuff. But you wouldn't have been looking to Warren Beatty and.
But yeah, it was obvious that like, here's a character, and that's like, okay, that's safe. We can all laugh, and we get the parameters of that. But yeah, this was using a big budget. You know, it's a nice looking film. It's everything about it is kind of top shelf. There's an incongruity there.
Right over here.
So in the film, when they were flying on the way to Morocco, they had a shot of the airplane in flight, and that looked like it was snipped right out of a Bob Hope road movie.
Yeah.
And they really should have called it The Road to Ishtar. It probably wouldn't have made any difference in how the public reacted to it, but that's really what it was.
But I think it would have sent a little bit of a tip-off to the establishment, people who would get that joke and know, okay, this is what we're riffing on. You know, the way those movies would send up pop culture and, you know, other genres, you know, kinds of films, you know, and that's what they're doing.
To be fair, if there was an airline flying between the Canary Islands and Morocco, it probably was a plane of that vintage. I would think. I saw another hand right over here.
Would it be possible to do a Steve Martin, underrated Steve Martin retrospective, like Pennies from Heaven, Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, Man with Two Brains? Those are hilarious movies that got overlooked, and people don't know them or remember them, but they're wonderful.
I can get the check from you right after this show. We'll do it. It'll be great. We'll love it.
Yeah, those all, I guess they are underrated, but they have their audiences,
They
right?
perform well, and nobody, people don't seem to remember them.
They don't.
Pennies from Heaven is especially, I mean, those are all great, but Pennies from Heaven is super weird, great. I wonder if we have any contributions from the audience before we wrap it up tonight. Anybody got another thing to say about Ishtar?
those people who saw it for the first time, did you love Ishtar? Yes, okay, good,
Liked
yeah.
it a lot.
Yeah, liked it a lot.
Well, we can all agree, it isn't the worst film ever fucking made. Like, wow, you know, it's not anywhere near, it's like here, it's not, you know, there, but it's here, it's not there, so.
I think it might
it's
be
unbelievable.
here. I think it might be here.
I think
don't
it's,
know.
yeah, it's way up there, but it's not.
So
You can talk about pacing issues, you know, whatever, but again, I like her unconventionality. It doesn't have to be, you know, I don't, you know, you just accept it.
It's hard to imagine
It's
a
what it
different,
is.
a different movie from this than the one that shows next week, which is Born on the 4th of July.
Yeah. Whew. Here we go. Yeah, really anxious to see that again. That is, you know, Stone really came, that was his decade, from where he started and where he ended. He had a good, you know, second half of the 80s, I guess. He came into his own as a filmmaker. And as much, I kind of make jokes about Tom Cruise in the 80s pretty consistently. But I only did that to build up to next week's film, because he's really fantastic. And it's such a great part, it's such a smart film, and a true anti-war movie. So I'm pretty sure. I haven't seen it in a while, but I do talk about it, and it's a good anti-war movie.
From a Vietnam vet, which is important.
The real deal,
Yeah.
you know. Stone, of course, had served in Vietnam. His Vietnam movie was Platoon, but this is Ron Kovic, the you know, a soldier that became a quadriplegic, and you know, it's his story coming home. And it's actually the story of coming home. That happened in the early 70s, and Jane Fonda knew him and kind of based Coming Home on him. So this is, you know, instead of just, oh, a guy who comes home from the war in a wheelchair, they kind of took that from him, but this is actually his full story. And, you know, from hometown to war protester. That's the whole story. So it's, I remember thinking it was just fantastic. Just such an accomplished movie, truly. Just a little bit of battle scenes, enough, but it's not, it's the coming home war movie, not so much the battle, but Cruise as not the best at everything. Like he wasn't in the 80s, he was the best at everything. Pool playing, bartending, fighter jet pilot, teenage pimp,
Right.
Whatever he was the best at. But yeah, not this one. He's a guy who's just kind of, he's not the best. He's just another guy.
So that's next Wednesday. I
Trying
hope to
hard.
see all of you here for that. So, and Rick, thanks so much.
Well, thank you guys for coming. This is really special. Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody.